This is MJ. I'm an author, I'm an artist, I'm an analyzer. Join me as I read an assortment of classic and modern middle grade books. Each week I'll share my thoughts on a different story and tell you if it is worthy of honor in the halls of the Fortress Fiction. You can find all my work at mjmunoz.com. So let's start off the Fortress Fiction episode for Little Women with a little bit of information about the book itself. Little Women is a coming-of-age novel, by the way, I'm reading this straight from the wiki, written by American novelist Louisa May Alcott, originally published in 2 volumes in 1868 and 1869, which there's actually mention of that in the version of the book that I listened to, which is kind of cute. The story follows the lives of the 4 March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and details their passage from childhood to womanhood, loosely based on the lives of the author and her 3 sisters. It is classified as an autobiographical or semi-autobiographical novel. Very interesting. Also, it is a little interesting that I'm including this in Fortress Fiction as a middle grade book because it could be considered YA. I would say the first half of the book is definitely more in the vein of middle grade, and the second is in the vein of YA perhaps, or maybe a romance. I'm not quite sure how to distinguish them, but together it definitely works. And yes, together they definitely work as one cohesive story, and as still something I think qualifies as middle grade fiction. Just because the March girls are growing up doesn't mean that it can't still be middle grade. It can't be appropriate for children as well. It is very appropriate for children. So anyway, let me see. There's a little bit more of interesting information I will talk about, I'll share with you, and then I'll talk about my thoughts on the book. Little Women was an immediate commercial and critical success, and readers were eager for more about the characters. Alcott quickly completed a 2nd volume titled Good Wives in the United Kingdom, though the name originated with the publisher and not Alcott. It was also met with success. The 2 volumes were issued in 1880 as a single volume titled Little Women. Alcott subsequently wrote 2 sequels for her popular work, both also featuring the March sisters, Little Men in 1871 and Jo's Boys in 1886. Very interesting. I'm going to keep reading a little bit more. The novel has been said to address 3 major themes: domesticity, work, and true love, all of them interdependent and each necessary to the achievement of its heroine's individual identity. According to... I'm going to stop there. So, very interesting. Here's another factoid. The book has been translated into numerous languages and frequently adapted for stage and screen. I think I know of 3 Little Women movies alone. And is there an anime? I don't know if there's an anime or not. There might be an anime. There's an anime of Emma. I know that for sure. Anyway, so now I'm going to start talking to you about this book. This lovely, lovely book. So what's the time right now? Okay, my 1-minute review of Little Women in the context of Fortress Fiction is that this book definitely belongs ensconced in great honor in the Fortress Fiction. I believe it is an entertaining book, and it is a positive, uplifting book. It is a beautiful book, and it encouraged me, it convicted me, it inspired me to be a better husband, to be a better father. It didn't actually until this moment make me think about like what a rotten kid I was at times, because these characters are just so lovely and so wonderful and so good and genuine. And they have their foibles and their trials, and they make mistakes, and you get to see this whole life captured in this story. And it really is beautiful, and I think everybody should read this book. Definite recommend from me. Now, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and talk about more of the book. Interesting. So, I just noticed that the title... from a very old document or manuscript, or I guess document version of the book, it's called Little Women or Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy by Louisa May Alcott, which is kind of funny. I wonder if that's them. That must be them in birth order, because, yeah, I believe that's them in birth order, which is pretty cute, pretty quaint. Oh, also, the original book has illustrations in it done by Louisa May Alcott, or it says illustrated by May Alcott, which I'm assuming that's her and not her sister, but you never know. But that's still really cool. It's one of these old books with the illustrations in it, which I think is absolutely beautiful. It's classic. Even Bridge to Terabithia had illustrations in it, and that was from 1975, I believe. And or was it 78? I don't quite remember now. But regardless, it's something very charming about these older books. Now, I listened to the audiobook of it, so I didn't get the benefit of that, but we actually have a copy of this, primo copy of the book that has illustrations in it. So, but this is my first time reading it, and I am a father, and I had a sister, or I have sisters. I don't know why I said it like that. I have sisters. I'm a father. I've been a husband and a son and all these other things, specifically to women, or in the context of having relationships with women in my family, in my life. And I have daughters as well. So this book was really interesting because it's a girl book. This book was written for girls, I believe, for girls, for women, and it's still beautiful and charming and funny and everything that it needs to be entertaining to me as a man who didn't grow up as a little girl. And it very honestly captured, I think, in a heightened sense, what it's like to grow up as a kid. Now, of course, I did not grow up in the 1800s in America. In America! Bonus points if you're listening to this and you know what that's a reference to. Just let me know. And anyway, I shouldn't be able to relate to this, but I do. And I think it's just because the characters are written in such a real way. Again, they have flaws, they have issues, they have things that trouble them, and they're so good. Not the characters are so good. Their flaws and their foibles are so good. And despite the fact that these characters are so good and so noble, they still really struggle. And that's really endearing. Probably one of the things I like best about this book is it's from a modern day perspective and from growing up with postmodern ideas and things like that, which I basically reject. I like that this isn't a subversion of a romance story. It is instead a family story, which contains romances in it, and it contains heartbreak, but it's not a book about a woman or a girl falling in love with a man and then living happily ever after. It's a book about these sisters and their lives, and it just feels it's a book about these sisters and their lives and how they live to the best of their ability, the ethics instilled in them by their parents. And I'm in the midst of raising my children and instilling in them my ethics with my awesome wife, who's 100% my partner, and we're very much in sync on 90% of everything we're doing, which is wonderful. It's so difficult, and I couldn't imagine doing it with somebody who I'm not in sync with like this. But thank God that's not an issue for us. So we're very much on the same page raising our children. And so are the March mother and father, who feature in this book. Marmee, as they call her, who I don't know what her real name is, but for some reason these, young American girls from, I don't even know where they are. I think they're in Boston, maybe. They eat lobsters at some point, so that makes me think that they're northeastern. No, but then again, their dad's fighting in the Civil War as a, what do you call those guys? Not a parson, not a pastor. Not a partridge in a pear tree. Their dad is fighting, or is serving, in the war as you've got Muslims, rabbis, pastors, or I should say imams, rabbis, pastors, priests who serve in this capacity in war. Chaplain. He's like a chaplain for a brigade or platoon or whatever it is. I don't know all the military stuff, and they don't go into all that in the book. But then he comes back, and while he's gone for a decent chunk of the book, their mother is raising them kind of like a single mother, and she's doing an amazing job. She is instilling, the kids already, they're not at each other's throats. They have their differences, and they're a little minor, you could say, but they're definitely not at each other's throats. They love each other, and they help each other, and they play and have fun with each other. And there's glimpses of them having friends outside of the home. I don't know what their schooling is like. They're all able to read. Perhaps well, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate, but they're all able to read and write, which isn't an issue for them. And there's no TV, there's no video games, there's no Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or anything like that. So they're not distracted by those sorts of things. They don't have those technologies, those avenues of interacting with the world. So instead, they read books, they write plays together, they act in plays together, they play with dolls, they take care of animals potentially, or to some extent. They do all these different things that you would have in this, early, in this Civil War era America, and it's really interesting to see all their interactions with each other and like how they make play and how they make entertainment for themselves and how they make their lives, because they're all very different from each other and they're all doing things they're all fairly independent people, and they all have their own avenues and silos of activity or their areas of focus and expertise partly because that's their nature and partly because sometimes in a family you have to kind of claim something as yours, and you act a little bit in distinction to other people so that you can have your thing. Or sometimes you copy. It kind of depends on the family dynamic specifically. But for the March sisters, I don't think we have too much of that kind of thing where I'm not going to be like this person. Jo is the most contrary of them all, but it's more specifically when she's told what's expected of her, she kind of wants to do the opposite. And that's atypical of the other sisters. But they all have their interests. Of course, Jo has her own. But she might, for a turn, pretend that she's not interested in something she's interested in if you were to say something to her about it, which is kind of interesting. So they all have very distinct personalities and differences between each other. And Jo kind of feels like the main character. With this being semi-autobiographical, it makes sense, and I can see how that informs the book and that kind of sets the tone for the book. But still, the ways that Marmee raises the girls and sets them up to go through life's trials and encourages them to go through them with love and dignity and gentleness. I want to switch gears now and talk about how Alcott, or Louisa May Alcott, being more of a Jo, being more of a man's woman, it makes sense why the men are so well written in this book. I really feel like every man is very authentically written in this book. It's a little bit shocking how well all these characters are written. So Laurie, the neighbor boy who the March sisters encounter and make friends with and make into a brother, basically, he's very well written. I don't know. I don't really want to spoil the book. It's a hard recommend. It's actually not only, you know what, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to say this instead. Not only is this book so good that it's a definite recommend, and I give it a 9 out of 10. By the way, I think by the end of the first chapter, I thought, wow, this book is amazing. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. If it continues this way. But not only is it an excellent book, and not only is it a definite recommend for anybody, and not only does it belong in the Fortress fiction, it actually is something that I will insist that people read. And I don't know what I need to do to pitch this book to people to get them to read it, other than saying it's amazing, it's very good. It may be too biblical for people, because it's very biblical, and I hesitate to say Christian, because while it is in fact Christian, and the March sisters are in fact Christians, as is their father, who's a pastor or a minister or something like that, and while the book does reference Pilgrim's Progress by insert name of author here, I do not remember the name of the author of Pilgrim's Progress at the moment, despite the fact that I read it in high school. I'm going to say, hold on, you know what, I'm going to look it up. Let's see. There may be an inspiration or a mention of who it was. Excuse me while I do things. Okay, John Bunyan. I was going to say John Milton, which is totally wrong. But apparently John Bunyan wrote The Pilgrim's Progress. This is referenced several times in the book, or in Little Women, and it's referenced to amazing effect. It's, if you don't know, Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory about Christians in Christianity, with a character whose name is Christian, and he goes through all these toils and meets all these characters who are allegorical representation. Well, they're allegory characters. I don't know how you say that any other way, any cleaner way. They're allegory characters representative of all these different things, including Apollyon, who is a weird Greekification of the name Abaddon from the Hebrew Bible, and Abaddon, I believe, is a demon who is associated with Sheol. Yeah, anyway, the whole angelology thing from Judaism is very strange to me, because angels are hardly referenced in the Torah and the Tanakh, and they're not very well described, except where they are, like in Ezekiel, and then demons are hardly ever mentioned either. But there's a whole angelology, demonology that was developed in Judaism over the years, and I believe the Catholic Church took a lot of that stuff and absorbed it into itself when the Catholic Church rose to more and more power and prominence. And while this is not a religious podcast, and it's not a podcast talking about religion, it's talking about books, this is fundamental background. It's world building, for lack of a better term, to this novel, because you have all this stuff mentioned. In fact, one of the chapters is called Joe Meets Her Apollyon, and because it's been so long since I read John Bunyan's novel, I didn't think it was a reference to that. I thought it was a reference to Greek mythology, perhaps, but then I looked it up and, oh yes, Apollyon, a.k.a. Abaddon, a.k.a. Sheol, or related to Sheol, and I thought, okay, it all makes sense now. Okay, I understand, this makes sense. Because really, the book is, yeah, I don't know how to sell it. I don't know how to sell it, because to my to Jews, I would sell it as, look, it references Christianity, but it does it in a very, Tanakh kind of way. And, like, there's even mentions of, like, oh, the friend who's always there for you, and it's speaking specifically about God the Father. There's, like, no mention of a Trinity here. There's no, does the name Jesus appear at all in the book? I don't know. But it's a very interesting representation of Christianity, because it's more of, like, a whole Bible kind of approach, and it references, like, maybe Heavenly Father, God the Father, once or twice, maybe three or four times at the most, I think, and maybe one Jesus is in there, but probably not at all. The events take place at Christmas, at least the start of the book does, and I don't remember if Easter is featured in this book or not. I kind of feel like it isn't, but, like, there's no Thanksgiving, there's no Halloween, there's the Christmas, then there's, like, different, like, seasonal things. Oh, it's springtime, we're going to go here, or it's, fall, we're baking this kind of thing, or whatever. But it's very interesting because it's just like a very biblical book. Like, fun fact, 2/3, I believe, of the so-called New Testament are quotes and references specifically to things from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible. Jewish people don't say the Old Testament, but they say it's the Tanakh. It's their Bible. It's the writings. It's the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, which is shrunk down into Tanakh and compressed into a single word. And versus there's Christians. One of the church fathers at one point, a church father specifically said, in order to distance Jews and Christians from each other, said, that's the Old Testament, this is the New Testament, we're better than them, we're replacing them, they need to go away, and if I can't make them go away, I'll definitely make you think they're old and busted, and we don't need to pay any attention to them. But anyway, that's getting a little far afield, but just, it's interesting because the Marges don't seem to have that kind of perspective. It seems like they would have been readers of the entire Bible, and would have valued things in Psalms and Proverbs, and any of the exciting stuff going on in the book of Joshua, or Judges, or anywhere throughout the Tanakh. There's lots of great things you can find in there, lots of great value, if you can look past it being old in comparison to your New Testament. But that's just from a Christian perspective. So, anyway, and actually, I'm saying that's the Christian perspective, but the Christian perspective represented by Alcott is a very soft one. It's not anti-Semitic, it's not anti-Jewish, it's not anti-Tanakh, it's just, like, very pro, God is your heavenly Father. He's, God the Father is your friend, who will, be there for you or whatever. And it's very much emphasizing again, the whole Bible and not, a specific person who is difficult for people to deal with at times. And at the same time, it's not, so that's what I would say to Jews. To Christians, I would say this book is, I don't know, it's everything you would want. Like, it's very encouraging of you loving God and being a good person and living a life of self-sacrifice and diligence and truth. And it talks about you being rewarded for being good and you suffering for being bad, which that may sound like a more of a Jewish thing, but it's really not. I think the best Christians are those who believe in truth and hard work and in seeking, not necessarily seeking blessing, but blessing being a consequence of obedience to God, which includes love of God and love of fellow man on equal footing, which is exactly how it's presented in the Tanakh, by the way. Yeah, I think that's definitely true of the best Christians. And it's a great book. And, it's specifically, Christian in name, even if there's room for a Jewish reader to not take offense really to anything in it, I think, for the most part, maybe the Christmas celebration. And then to the secular person, the person who isn't Christian, isn't Jewish, doesn't really have a love for God in their hearts or in their lives, or that's not really something important to them, or even just a religious person who's nominally they were born into whatever faith, but they don't really practice it. It's just a good book. It's like a toned down Downton Abbey. It's very reminiscent of Jane Austen novels. There's less scandal in this book, but there's heartache and there's heartbreak and there's sadness and there's all these different trials that these characters face and face heroically. Some of them face their challenges heroically. Some of them face their challenges less than heroically. And there's falls and redemption and people getting back up. It's just good drama. It's good human drama. And if you can appreciate the context of these people coming from a Christian milieu, an early American Christian milieu, or religious perhaps is the better way to say it, you can definitely appreciate the human struggle that's captured in these pages. And yeah, Jo feels she's not a feminist. Oh, I don't know. Feminism is a difficult topic to handle, but she's a very interesting woman. She's a very nuanced woman, and all the March sisters get to be nuanced women, and that makes them all the more interesting, I think, and that makes the book all the more interesting. The ideal of marriage and children is there, and it's achieved. Well, it's there and it's achieved. I'll put it that way, because I don't want to go into spoilers, because it's such a good book, and telling you things that happen wouldn't really spoil it for you, especially if you've seen the movies or any other adaptation, but it makes it a richer experience for you to experience it yourself and to have it all unfold for you as, in real time as you're reading it. The foreshadowing that's there, the things that dawn on you, the things that you think are going to happen and then don't happen and then maybe they do, and the back and forth of all it. It's such an enjoyable trek to go on. And, like Christian's Pilgrim's Progress, the book takes you on a journey as the reader where you get to go through all of this stuff and experience it along the March sisters. And it just feels so good. And it's just, it's a journey. It's a journey. It's a story. There's this heart there, and it's a gorgeous book. And I don't really feel, and forgive me for having a long, talking about religion diversion in the midst of talking about this book, but it's very important to the context of the book, I think. But still, you don't need to fear whatever camp you're in. It has its appeal, and it has a lot of value, and I would say there's not just value in this book, there's virtue in this book. The lessons taught, it's funny because it's not, some could accuse this book of being preachy. I would say, that's your opinion, I would say it's not preachy, it's illustrative. There are characters, Marmee specifically at one point, talks about her anger and how her anger had ruled her at one point, and how she has fought against her anger with God's help, with her husband's help, and on her own terms, because she doesn't want to pass on the anger that so ruled her and caused her to hurt other people and as a consequence of hurting other people, to hurt herself, to harm herself. I'm not saying physically, like she hurt people and then those people turned away from her or weren't there for her or were estranged from her, and that hurt her. She lived with the consequences of her actions. She made her bed and had to lie in it, and she doesn't want that for her daughters. So she's trying to live a different way. She's trying to elevate herself as a person. She's trying to do better and be her best self at all times because she's living for those girls. Not that she doesn't have her own life with Mr. March. That's not the case. They do have a love and a marriage and a romance and a beautiful life together. And they get to share that for the entire, well, not the entire book. They get to share that throughout the course of the book, I'll say. And you can tell that's something that's important to them. And that's what she wants. And she wants to be a mother. And she wants to be a certain type of mother. And she wants to be an inspiration to her children. And she gets to be. And it's beautiful. Like, it's almost Marmie's story. I don't know. It's peculiar. It's almost Marmie's story, but it's obviously not. It's definitely Joe's story, but it's just Marmie and Joe and the other girls are so interwoven into this narrative, and like, I don't know, Joe gets to be on the back burner, she gets to be a side character in the book, she gets to be in all these different positions, and there's all this different focus and emphasis on all these different characters, and it's such a rich book, and there, the pains and the sorrows and the heartache that people go through, you get to see, like, some of them just happen, some of them are caused by them, some of them are consequences of their actions, and you get to see them over the course of their lives, because the book starts when they're very young. I would say the youngest is, 10 or 12 at the youngest, and it ends when the girls are, in their 30s, let's say. So it's a good span of years, 15 or so years. 15 to 20 years is, I would guess, the span of the book. It could be a little bit later. I'm not 100% sure. But it's so interesting how much of their lives it covers. And in doing that, and in them facing the challenges they do, and in the way they do, and because of the context that they have, you get to learn virtue through seeing their mistakes and through seeing them fight their mistakes and combat things. And I don't know, just think there's like a rom-com section in there, like early married life being a disaster rom-com, but there's also just like lessons to learn as like a husband and wife. Like, it's interesting because it's a book, it's a very instructive book, but it's a narrative first and foremost, and that's really enjoyable to me. I think it's wonderful. Again, if that didn't sell it to you, let me know. I definitely want as many people to read this book as possible. It's an amazing book. One of the top books. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I jokingly told my daughter that it's better than Jurassic Park. I love Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is such a good book, but that's like popcorn garbage trash compared to this. Like, this is a good book. Like, it's got amazing things in it. And not that Jurassic Park doesn't have its merits. It has merits. It's mostly entertaining. There's some deeper things going on there, but this has a story and it has value and virtue. It's a virtue. It's almost a holy book. It's definitely a virtuous book, and it's incredible. It's incredible. So, I'm going to check and see if anybody's left any comments for me on this book, and I'm going to share them with you. And regardless of whether they have or not, if you have something to say about this book, I would love to hear it. Leave me a comment. There's a variety of ways you can contact me through the show notes, through the blog. mjmunoz.com is the best way to do it. And yeah, I'm going to take a break for now, come back with messages from people or not, thoughts and feelings on this book from people or not, if they decided to share at this time. And on the other side of it, I'll wrap things up and then we'll part ways for now. I did not obtain the feedback I was looking for, but for now, that's okay. I decided I'm going to do something a little different now that I've come back to the episode, and that's that I'm going to tell you about other works from Louisa May Alcott, because I like this book so much, and I actually found out a little bit more in doing this light research. So Little Women is the story of the girls when they're young. Good Wives is the second half that is mentioned. The next part of this will be published if this first part has success, and that's what the book Little Women is now today. So it used to be Little Women and Good Wives, and now it's together in one volume. She also wrote a Little Men book in 1871, or it was released in 1871, and then in 1886 she released Joe's Boys, and that's a sequel to Little Men. And then she has other novels, The Inheritance, Moods, The Mysterious Key and What It Opened, that's a great title. I want to read that book. An Old-Fashioned Girl, Will's Wonder Book, Work, A Story of Experience, Beginning Again, Being a Continuation of Work, Eight Cousins, or The Ant Hill, and then Rose and Bloom, which is a sequel to Eight Cousins, and Under the Lilacs, Jack and Jill, A Village Story, and apparently, I wonder if these were, A.M. Bernard. Well, anyway, 3 more books and then I'll stop. Behind a Mask, or A Woman's Power, that was as A.M. Barnard, a pen name she had. The Abbot's Ghost, or Maurice, Their Heron's Temptation, and lastly, A Long Fatal Love Chase, which apparently was not published until 1995, which is interesting. So, anyway, you may want to check out some of those other books by Alcott if you like Little Women, like I did. And as I'm rounding out the episode, I want to let you know the next Fortress Fiction episode will be, the next book I'll be reading for Fortress Fiction is going to be Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor, originally published in 1976. And here's the little blurb for it. In the Depression-era South, the Logan family fights racism and injustice. And I listened to a little bit of there was a very short intro on the Cloud Library version of this book I found, which you can find it there for free if you've got a library card. I listened to, just it has a very small intro, like less than 5 minutes, and it was really interesting. And then I listened to just a little bit of the book, but I hadn't done my Little Women recording yet, so I had to stop myself. But from the little snippet I heard, it sounds interesting. So I'm looking forward to reading that book and talking about it with all of you. So again, it's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. Apparently it's book 4 in that series, which it's kind of, it reminds me of like the Little House on the Prairie series, because it's a series of books about a family, and it's historical. I know dramatized is the right way to say it or not, but it's a family story written down in books and turned into these, interesting, successful stories that have touched people, and I'll be curious to read this one. I hope you enjoyed that. Subscribe to keep up with me. Like and share to help me reach more people like you. And go to mjmunoz.com to find your next favorite thing. And don't forget to let your voice be heard. Stories are always better when you're part of the conversation. Until next time, be well. This is MJ signing out. This has been a Story Over Everything production.